Hello, welcome to Business as Usual, where we cover company histories. Today, we talk about Foot Locker. To give a proper account of Foot Locker's history, not only must we time travel a bit, we must also traverse a few different company histories. To start off, in upstate New York in 1879, we meet a man by the name of Frank Woolworth, who is just opening his first retail store in Utica, New York. So, let's get it started. Okay, for us to fully understand the foundation the Woolworth Empire was erected upon, and which Foot Locker later sprang out of, let's peek into Frank Woolworth's career beginnings. Starting his apprenticeship as a clerk at the spry age of 23, Frank worked at Augsbury and Moore, a dry goods wholesaler. After shuffling about the industry a while and hoping to find his footing, unsuccessfully we might add, Frank eventually ended up back with his former employer, William Moore, in 1876. Despite some frustrating career stagnation, this opportunity in his life would prove pivotal. His current job responsibilities put him in charge of window displays, which were aimed at ridding excess inventory. To accomplish this, Frank dreamt up a 5-cent sale, simply advertising a sign that read, "Any article on this counter, 5 cents." I think you're getting the idea. Frank, he's a real straight shooter. Wonderfully, it was a success. After the fact, Frank walked away with the belief that this strategy would work on a grander scale. This business philosophy of the 5-cent sale would prove key to his meteoric rise in the future. Now, in 1879, Frank left Moore and Smith with $315 in funding secured from his former employer. That February, he opened his first store named the 5 and 10 cent store. I'm starting to believe Frank, he doesn't have an ambiguous idea inside him at all. At first, the store was a success, but the business strategy wasn't enough to overcome the lack of good location. Nevertheless, Frank was ecstatic and closed down shop and giddily skipped off with $252 new dollars in capital. Just a few months later, he opened his second shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This time with prime real estate, business was a hit, with Frank selling 30% of his inventory in his first day alone. This encouraged Frank to open more stores, as we'll see, and to change his store names in the future to Woolworth. Now, in the mid-1880s, Woolworths had expanded to 7 stores between Pennsylvania and New York. These stores were mostly run by former managers who Woolworth turned partners. These men included his brother Charles, his former employer William, his cousin Seymour, and business associate Fred Kirby. And in the next few years, as Woolworth's success skyrocketed, many partners bought out Frank's shares, and in 1888, Frank started to officially open Woolworth stores with his own capital. Now, all the while, as Woolworth's operations steadily grew, so did the strain upon Frank's back. Desperately feeling the need for governance, Frank set up headquarters in New York City, where he was handling everything from store inspections, accounting, and even daily management letters. And in tragic fashion, Frank Woolworth contracted typhoid in 1888. This posed serious consequences for day-to-day operations. Quickly, Frank realized the importance of delegation and soon after hired his first general manager by the name of Carson Peck. This would prove to be a huge blessing in disguise. Now, free of the daily grind and cured of typhoid, Frank channeled his wanderlust and began trips to Europe just 2 years later. This proved invaluable as it added rarity to his inventory and allowed retail stores to sell unique products tailored to customers. As a result, people stormed Frank's stores for sought-after European pottery and decorations. All in all, by the dawn of the 20th century, there were 59 Woolworth stores producing $5 million in sales. Starting off in the 20th century, this was a tremendous time for the Woolworth Company. 5 years in 1905, excessive demand led to the growth of 120 stores, resulting in $10 million in sales. So let's take a recap on these numbers for a bit. What these numbers show is the Woolworth stores were growing at a 12% annual rate over 20 years. Simply put, fantastic. Then, 7 years later, as competition grew hot, Frank saw the opportunity to cement a competitive advantage over his peers J.G. McCrory and S.S. Kresge. Frank orchestrating a 5-company merger, all involving his past partners at Woolworths. These are names you'll find familiar: Charles Woolworth, William Moore, Fred Kirby, Seymour Knox, and a new partner, Mr. Charlton. This created a mega retailer America hadn't come to know yet. By the time the dust settled on these mergers, America had F.W. Woolworth Company, a nationwide retailer consisting of 596 stores and $52 million in sales. This is simply unheard of at this time. In those 7 years alone, sales grew at a 27% rate. And as the Woolworth train proudly steamed ahead, they would encounter some problems. When right-hand man Carson Peck passed away in 1915. In response, Frank took the reins of day-to-day general management. And if one problem wasn't enough, more trouble was on the way. In 1919, at the age of 67, Frank Woolworth died due to the strenuous job demands. Even though the man was lost, his mission lived on and expanded continually after his untimely death. Well, I guess all deaths are untimely. Now, by 1929, Woolworths was by far and away the biggest retailer in America. As it stood, Woolworth had 2,100 stores with $273 million in sales. Next, Kresge with 500 stores and $147 million in sales, doing quite nice. And lastly, McCrory, 220 stores with $40 million in sales. So a third of a way into the 20th century, and we see Woolworths has built themselves a nice competitive lead. While Woolworths was enjoying the fruits of their labor, things were about to change. From the mid-1940s to the early 1960s, the company faced increasing headwinds. Now, despite eclipsing the $1 billion sales mark, which was pretty great for the time, Woolworths' culture was drifting in a depressed dystopia. And now, Greater America was prospering post-World War II, and the company's focus was, well, misaligned. Instead of offering premium service for a burgeoning middle class, they focused on keeping costs low. Let me give you an example. This is like having a run-heavy team in the modern-day NFL. You're blatantly passing up golden opportunities for success. These missed opportunities cost them dearly. And in 1953, earnings hit a record low. 5 years later, the board of Woolworths voted in a new CEO, Robert Kirkwood, who was to flip the switch on their current fate. Regardless of all the new schemes he hatched, earnings were still dwindling. And then, in the face of increasing competition from supermarkets and premium service retailers, things were about to get uglier. By 1963, peer competitors W.T. Grant and S.S. Kresge were passing them. So let's talk a little bit more about those earnings. Let's take a look at this chart. As we said, in 1953, a new record low was set for earnings. Fast forward 7 years later, and half that. Then, in 1963, things got worse. So I think you can get a sense of why the Woolworth Company was in this depressed mentality. Not only were they the number one retailer amongst their peers, they had the most sales, they had the largest physical store count, they also had a customer base that was growing wealthier by the year. So they had all these ingredients for success, and they were kind of coming up with a goose egg. So I'd like to ask you, what would you do if you were Woolworth? How would you turn these things around? If we had one word to describe the company's experience from post-World War II up until the 1960s, it'd be troubling. And if we had one word to describe their experience from the 60s up into the 70s, it would be trying. Now, during these decades, Woolworths was determined to shake the monkey off its back, per se. And what we see is a multitude of strategies rolled out to accomplish this. First in the cards was opening Woolco in 1962, the same year Kmart debuted from our friends SS Kresge. Now, this created an angle for them to compete with the full-line department stores. And when I say full, we're talking about some stores being 100,000 square feet. This is nearly equal to one of the largest flying machines in history, the USS Macon, which was 2.5 football fields long. Remember what we said about Frank Woolworth. He simply means what he says. And in 1965, they go shoe shopping to implement the second card of their strategy, which meant they acquired Kinney Shoe Company for $39 million. The effect this had was 585 additional retail presences in 45 states. And although management had no earthly idea at the time that they had just purchased, so to speak, their diamond in the rough, they were hell-bent on continuing the diversification. And subsequently, they wrapped up the deal to buy Aussie shoe business William the Shoe Man, which gave them a dominant identity in the athletic and family shoe segment. Finally, in 1968, sales came bubbling up to $2 billion. But sadly, they had given up their competitive lead to Kresge. And by 1973, they had lost that lead totally. Kresge had reported $4.6 billion in sales to Woolworths' $3.7. And in another defining moment for this company, help was on the way. As you'll see, the first spottings of Foot Locker were found in 1974. And these companies spawned out of the Kinney Shoe division. And they were highly profitable ventures, by the way. Now, their diamond in the rough started giving off the slightest glimmers. And 4 years later, Woolworths sales stood at $6 billion, with the Kinney Shoe division adding $800 million in sales annually and growing at a rapid rate of 20%. During the 80s and 90s, what we'll see from Woolworths is a huge paradigm shift. And we found a little symbolic video for you to view. Now, during this video, the Turkish kebab seller, that's Woolworth Company. And that delicious piece of meat, yum. That's their collection of retail operations. And what Woolworths is going to be looking to do is shave off the money-losing operations and keep those key juicy bits that can be key anchor stores for the future success of the company. And this transformation takes place almost immediately. In 1982, 336 Woolco stores are immediately shut down. And this drastically shrinks the size of the company. This results in basically laying off a small city's worth of people and equates to $325 million of losses. Now, on a positive note, they were able to unload the British Woolworth units for $279 million. This gave them a little bit of breathing room. Now, at this point, it became more clear that Woolworths was looking for a new core strategy. And after these enormous shakeups, we had a Woolworths left with 1,300 stores made up of Foot Locker, Richmond Brothers, Lady Foot Locker, Susie Casual, J. Branham's, and Kinney Shoe Company. Effectively, we had a new specialty retail strategy going on at Woolworths Company. And all the while they were building up this specialty retail group, Foot Locker was becoming a household name. And in 1990, it saw itself selling 20% of all athletic footwear in the USA. And in addition, they made some noteworthy acquisitions to their budding athletic retail operations when they bought East Bay and Champs Sports. This furthered their reach in the athletic retail industry. Now, while we had some positive news with the buildup of this specialty retail, things were still unclear. And then current CEO William Lavin, announced his desire to clean up operations and turn the company into a leaner retailing machine. And he kept his promise. He made quick moves to vanquish 400 Woolworths and sell the 122 remaining Woolcos to Walmart. Now, these were the main closings, which in total saw 1,000 stores closed and an additional 13,000 jobs eliminated. Not easy decisions to make at all. And this resulted in $495 million in losses in 1993. But according to Lavin, for the long-term success of the company, this was a much-needed relief. But Lavin's vision would prove to be short-lived, as Lavin was caught up in an accounting scandal which proved too much for him to overcome. To replace him, the board came up with nothing short of a miracle when they hired longtime Macy's manager Roger Farah. And at the time, Woolworths was in shambles, and Farah's first move was to carry on the torch William Lavin had been carrying. His first step, in 1995, he decided to end dividends. An 83-year streak had to be ended to boost a starving cash flow. And this influx of cash gave Farah the tools to tackle debt by either quickly paying it down or restructuring unfavorable debts to a longer term. Now next, at this time, it was known Foot Locker was understood to be Woolworth's ace of spades, and outsiders tried to pull off a hostile takeover of the Foot Locker unit. Under Farah's leadership, this was quickly denied by shareholders. Now, if it seemed like Woolworth's fortunes were turning, you'd be wrong. In 1997, the company was dealt both a psychological and foretelling blow when it was replaced on the Dow Jones by Walmart. Subsequently, Woolworths went on to lose $37 million for the year. Unable to take this bad news, the company executed plans to close all remaining stores in the USA under the Woolworth banner and to convert them to Foot Lockers, Champ Sports, other specialty formats like the thriving East Bay operation. Now finally, it's starting to feel like the end of an era and the start of a new chapter. And the company was light enough to be flexible and aggressive again in their strategies. They signaled this with a name change. They were now to be known as the Venator Group, which is Latin for sportsman. This was to reflect their athletic retailing aspirations. And then, from the years 1995 to 1998, Venator Group went on to spend $300 million to streamline and reinvent 1,300 stores under their various specialty retail banners. Now, by the latter half of 1999, Venator Group was showing promise. With rising comparable sales and robust growth, this all added up to a 17% market share of the athletic footwear market in the USA. Now, by the year 2000, Venator Group had $3.8 billion in sales with over 3,700 stores in 14 countries alone. As the good fortune started to accumulate, the Venator Group used this as leverage to go airborne into the 21st century. And as Roger Farah is hanging up the cleats, they land a big fish in Matt Serra. He came to be known as the man who finished the plans designed by Lavin and Farah, and then cranked that success dial 10 notches past 10. A year after Serra takes over Venator Group, he makes a telling change to their name, opting for Foot Locker. No ambiguity could be left for their future endeavors. Now, where Serra differentiated himself from his predecessors is his intent on making Foot Locker synonymous with entertainment. He championed this plan by placing Foot Lockers near theaters, restaurants, and gaming outlets, in addition to their mall presences. Now, they coupled these strategies with a fun, edgy marketing campaign that appealed to the youth. Let's take a look at a type of commercial that evolved from a Matthew Serra-styled campaign.
What's going on? This is Reggie Coast here to tell you about the
As you can see here, they take a fun 90s retro style take on the video. And they're not even trying to sell shoes. They're just making a little spoof with LiAngelo Ball. We'll give you a little backstory on him after the commercial.
But LiAngelo, tees like this must be expensive.
No, Reggie. These tees are available for a one-time price of just $29.99.
Wow. Now that's an absolute steal. Sorry, I didn't mean... I meant the price is so good it must be criminal. Anyway, order your teas right now, because once they're gone...
So, if you don't know LiAngelo Ball, he spent one semester at UCLA, and when they took a trip for a basketball game in China, he was caught shoplifting. And it took heavy influence from the President of the United States and his cabinet members to get him released without jail time. Foot Locker shows itself, they can be kind of light and funny and, you know, be humorous about a situation like this. They don't have to just market their shoes. Now let's take a look at a few more of their advertisements that you might have seen.
I'm going all out, crushing like Barkley. The force and the power of my energy. It's like a sunstorm, a straight cyclone, setting the world on fire like a hole in the ozone. It's going down. Paul Pierce gonna show you how. 20 coming at you like wow.
The past meets the present. Introducing the new Nike 20 collection. Nowhere but Foot Locker.
Now, as you can see, they're definitely marketing to their basketball players and their athletes. They show some great players from the past, Charles Barkley, and the future at that time, which would have been Paul Pierce. Here's another one.
See something you feeling?
Yeah, classic, size 10.
Catch me at a light, holla, I ain't hearing you, dog. You can't stop her. Classics on my mind on the way to Foot Locker.
I usually don't walk, but when F.A.B. bop pass it, you could better send some Reebok classics. It's good seeing the classic. Yeah, size 10. Like about now.
Yeah, it's real simple. Feel the beat now. Go ahead, cop a pair, they clap.
Here, they're kind of appealing to their street casual group with some good hip-hop music that most of their customers might know. And then we have the marketing campaign for the kids.
One of the new Converse weapons.
With Converse, it's always game day.
Guys, we've got more than one pair.
All the coolest Converse for back to school. You can get them at Kids Foot Locker.
So there, Foot Locker kind of shows themselves as fun and competitive and a little outrageous because these kids are playing a game of basketball with a shoe because they love Foot Locker, right? And you know what? These marketing campaigns that were edgy and fun, they had resounding success. And continuing through the early 21st century, Foot Locker's fortunes increased, as did their friendship with Nike. But unfortunately, during 2002, it looked like Nike and Foot Locker were headed for a rocky ending. Nike was putting pressure on retailers to buy a certain percentage of low-margin, less popular products in order to get the premium shoe selections. This was causing Foot Locker to bleed red, and in a shocking announcement, Foot Locker said they would be no longer carrying Nike products unless their demands were recognized. Foot Locker's willingness to walk away worked wonders. Late in year 2003, with both companies reeling from hurting sales, the two companies found common ground, and today their relationship has rebounded and has even entered crush status. If you look at Foot Locker's financial statement 10K, it's common to see Foot Locker carrying around 70% Nike inventory, and for Nike to provide select access to their rarest products. So as we see, 6 years after Serra stepped foot on the scene, we have a hyper-focused retailer. We have some retailer that's all about thrills and competitions. It's not just about selling shoes, it's about the whole experience. And we have a man that took a company from selling $3.8 billion in revenue to $6 billion in revenue. He changed that company from a money-losing business to a thriving retailing machine. Viewing Foot Locker in hindsight, or we could say Woolworths, or even Vendor Group, I get a sense of resiliency and skill for adaptation. Charles Darwin once said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. it is the one that is most adaptable to change. Foot Locker showed numerous times their willingness to adapt and take chances. Just think of all their variety stores, from kids marts to athletic shoe stores, women's casual clothing, even pharmacies. They've shed multiple companies' skins to survive and achieve success. This approach has worked wonders for them, the stakeholders, and the shareholders. Now, looking into the future, it's always a bit hazy, but it appears, once again, Foot Locker has many challenges on the way. Recently, Nike has stated ambitious sales initiatives of $50 billion, which calls on it to grow its online and in-house retail businesses, what we like to call the direct-to-consumer business. This has a lot of people questioning, will Nike even need a Foot Locker in the future? Will they just sell shoes through their website and through their stores mainly? Nevertheless, this is a huge threat for Foot Locker. And additionally, Nike has addressed their counterfeit sales problems. They did this by taking steps with Amazon and coming to an agreement with the megastar online retailer to sell footwear on their website. Although the majority speculate Nike will only sell basic shoes, it nevertheless opens up another door for further competition with Foot Locker. Not good news exactly. If all this wasn't enough, surely you heard the effect Amazon's had on physical retail stores. In the last 2 years, there have been 9 retail bankruptcies and several hundred stores closing per year. Some of these retailers you'll recognize. We got Macy's, JCPenney's, Radio Shack, and Sears, for example. And we'll stop it there just to keep it short. Overall, in 2017, there were 6,700 retail store closures, and this is in a bull economy. By now, you get the sense there are seismic shifts going on around Foot Locker. But on the plus side, a tailwind they've received, Nike has cut down their retail partners from 30,000 just to 40. This is huge news, as Foot Locker was already number 1 on the speed dial with Nike. But now, they're going to be getting even more attention. So this could help abate some of the risk that Foot Locker is looking at. So, as we stand right now, Foot Locker appears to have a very opaque future. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Foot Locker will be able to adapt to the new retail environment and find success? Or is it going to succumb to the modern day retail environment? I'm curious to know your thoughts. Leave them below in the comment section if you wish. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and send me your comments. See you again.